and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel, where I'm your host, Elise, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull. Took me a little bit longer than I was intending to get started. Sorry about this very slight delay. Had some technical stuff to iron out, but I think we've got some interesting stuff for today. We've got a few different options. We've got Sabine Hossenfelder, who is just a, bad take factory, has got a video on how capitalism is good, and she wants us to let her explain. And we've also got Vush explaining about one of the many things that right-wingers really ought to agree with him on. And some more other things. We've got Joe Biden just became the most pro-union president in modern history, which is really really heavily relying on how you define modern history. Because if modern history includes, any of the 20th century, no, he's not. That's not even hard. So, let's see. I tried the Sabine Hossenfelder bullshit.
Capitalism will kill us all. That is, if you trust Greta Thunberg.
And, anyone who's taken a serious look at how capitalism even functions. Oh, wow, she's... yeah, she's quoting the Daily Express. Well, I mean, I'm impressed. I mean, the people who are, known... The people that even the Daily Mail considers to be, too far right and, too much of a penchant to make up stories. Yeah, quoting the Daily Express, I'm impressed there. How's everyone doing tonight, chat?
Which maybe you should not. Free markets will save us all, if you trust Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which maybe you should not. Maybe we should talk about what capitalism and free markets are.
Well, let's find out whether Sabine Hossenfelder even knows what they are.
Will they kill us or save us? That's what we'll talk about today.
Oh, wait a second. Did I put this... is this still on, 0.7? Oh, that's why that sounds a bit weird. No wonder she sounds, drunk as fuck. For my other stream, I had the videos on 0.75, 75% speed.
Before we talk about capitalism and markets and stuff, we need to talk about money. I don't mean my money, though while we're at it, check out my Patreon. I mean money in general. What do we even need money for?
We don't really. That's just something that we need because there's capitalism.
Suppose you have an apple, but you'd rather have an egg. You ask your friend Sue, the one with the chickens, and trade an egg for an apple. Okay, but what if Sue doesn't want...
God, this is okay, we're just gonna do this, fucking 8th grade econ class? Is this what she's going to do? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that is her level.
Want an apple, she'd rather have a banana. No problem. You ask your friend Joe with the bananas if...
Or we have communism, and, if you need a fucking egg, you just go get eggs. If there are, if there are eggs available, you take some eggs for whatever, as many as you might need, and she gets her fucking banana, and nobody has to fucking trade anything. Why has he got an apple if he doesn't want one?
He will trade your apple for
Maybe
a banana.
He wants the apple.
Then you trade the banana for Sue's egg. Okay, but what if Joe doesn't want an apple either? He'd rather have new shoelaces.
Then he has a problem that's known as pica, where you eat things that are actually not food.
No problem. You ask your friend Mary if she'll take an apple for shoelaces. Give the shoelaces to Joe.
Well, the thing about this is, money exists, and these sorts of transaction chains are a thing that actually still happens.
Take the banana.
Money did not overcome this.
And sure enough, you have your egg. It works, but honestly, that seems a little cumbersome. How about we instead trade something that everyone will accept, because they can exchange it for something else later?
Yeah, and then why don't we make people's entire survival dependent on having a sufficient amount of it? And why don't we, like, just to make it more interesting, why don't we have the minimum amount of that thing that you need in order to be able to survive periodically go up at like fucking warp speed?
Like gold, maybe. I give some gold to Sue, and she gives me
What the fuck's she gonna do with gold,
then
though?
She can take the gold and give it to
Doesn't
Joe.
look like very good quality gold.
And get her banana. That's much easier. Hooray, we just invented commodity money. All right, but now imagine you don't want to buy an egg, but an entire chicken farm.
Like, how much of this is just going to be her explaining what she found when she looked at, like, fucking explaining economics to, like, primary schoolers?
That would be a lot of gold you'd have to wheel around. So how about we instead, I don't know, print the face of a king onto a piece of gold and say it stands for an entire cart of gold? Come to think of it, why bother with gold? Let's just print it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, because it is entirely arbitrary. And while we're at it, why should somebody actually control all of that themselves? Why shouldn't that just belong to all of us? Surely we all need it.
The paper itself doesn't have much of a value, but if we all agree on what it stands for, we can use it for trade. Hooray, we just invented token money. That sounds great.
This is just PragerU with worse graphics and German accent.
The problem is, if a lot of vendors just refuse to accept the money, it stops working. So in reality, token money is backed up by a king or a government, which enforces that vendors accept the money as payment. It's then called fiat money. Almost all money we use today is fiat money, except cryptocurrencies.
Except that's also fiat money, because there's literally nothing about them that actually changes anything about this. It's the same thing. It's another socially constructed speculative asset that has little to no inherent value. But, and also, cryptocurrency is just a fucking scam.
But that's another story. Fiat money is fascinating because it's ultimately still based on trust. If all you guys watching this video freak out, exchange your entire US dollars for euro, and tell your friends to do the same, the US dollar would collapse. So don't do it.
Well, no, it probably wouldn't, because the US dollar isn't just backed by people's trust. It is backed by the entire fucking military-industrial complex.
Several economists have argued that any community of sufficiently intelligent traders will eventually introduce a type of token money because it's the most efficient way to distribute resources.
Except that's complete nonsense. There's nothing efficient about that at all. Like, how is that? You can't just say it's the efficient way to distribute resources on its own. Okay. Because the thing is, like, the most efficient way to distribute resources, then, if we're just taking distribution without any specifications, is just sort of dump them somewhere. Money is the most efficient way to distribute resources if the idea is that it should end up in the hands of the people who have the most money. But if the idea is that the resources maybe ought to be available to everyone who needs them, then it's a horrible way to do it. It doesn't fucking work.
This idea was maybe first clearly formulated by the Scottish economist Adam Smith.
We're about to find out whether she read him or not. I'm guessing not.
Alright, so we have money, but our busy traders still have a problem. Suppose you have a lot of apples and not sufficiently many people to buy them. Your amazing apples rot away.
Well, then you're in a crisis of capitalism.
What a shame.
That looks like
You
Gabriel
like to make
Boric,
apple
well.
juice from them, but you can't afford a juice press.
Well, I mean, one option, if you can't afford a juice press, is maybe we all have a couple of juice presses. We have a whole juice pressing area. And if you want to make juice out of your whole bunch of apples, then you just go down to you just book a time, go to the juice pressing facility, do your pressing, bottle your juice or whatever you're going to do with it, and you're done. No need to own the fucking juice press unless you just really want to have one.
So your breakthrough innovation doesn't come into being. That sucks. However, your friend Sue has been getting really rich with all her chickens.
So far, she's not making a great case for capitalism.
In fact, she's sitting on a big pile of money that she doesn't know what to do with.
Ooh, we're gonna get into speculative financial assets.
Sue sees your problem and offers you a deal. She gives you some of her money so that you can buy your juice press. You just have to agree that if you get rich with your juice press, you give her the money back, plus something on top.
How is this more efficient than just having the juice press available, though?
That money which Sue gives to you is your capital. And such was born the capitalist. The capitalist is a person
That is actually not what capital is.
or institution who provides capital to those who want to launch a new business.
No, that's like, where is she getting that? I mean, yeah, you've got like terms like venture capitalists and stuff like that, but no, a capitalist is a person who makes their money by investing it. They're not necessarily providing capital to somebody else who's trying to launch a new business. They may simply buy an existing factory or shop or something like that, and then they make money off of the people who work there.
Someone who's able and willing to take the risk that this capital will never have a return on investment. Today we grow up with money and banks and all that, and we tend to take them for granted. And while
yeah, she's just really. I don't really know many people who take money for granted, actually.
money lending and a basic notion of financial debt date back thousands of years, capitalism and all the elaborate financial instruments that come with it is a surprisingly recent innovation. It didn't
Oh wow, she's actually going to acknowledge that. That is unusual.
really take off until the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago.
Well, okay. 1 point in her favor, because a lot of people who are going to who try to make this sort of pro-capitalist argument and approach it in this basic-ass way will act like capitalism is just when people trade things or when there's money.
And it's dramatically changed the world. Scientists tend to associate the stunning societal progress we've seen since then to science and technology. But I think that's having it backwards. The driver of all this progress was the capitalist system that allowed an efficient allocation of resources.
But, I mean, you see, that kind of works up until the part where she just sort of throws in the idea that this was an efficient allocation of resources. Because the thing about efficiency, any notion of efficiency, is it depends on the purpose. It allowed an allocation of resources that did a wonderful job of making a very small number of people very rich. But if your measure of efficient allocation of resources is whether there are people who are starving when there is food, then that doesn't wash. But yeah, in the sense that the technology that has been developed has been very much a function of the way in which the mode of production we exist in, the capitalist system. Yeah, which is why actually so much of it just sucks.
By resources, I don't just mean raw materials, but also goods and human resources.
People. Could we just call them people?
Capitalism is a system that distributes these resources without anyone needing to have an overview, just by interactions between traders.
Now tell me, does that ever have any kind of downside? The complete lack of an overview, the complete lack of any kind of planning, The fact that everybody's just looking at the next quarter, does that ever have, like, does that maybe have some crises?
It's pure genius if you think about it. And that's why science took off, not the other way around.
Except that actually science took off a little bit before capitalism started. Because the means of industrial production had to exist in order to actually shift the mode of production over to it.
Remember that story about how the Scottish physician Alexander Fleming supposedly accidentally discovered penicillin in 1928 and saved the lives of countless wounded soldiers in World War II? Yeah, well, that isn't really what happened. First of all, scientists had discovered that the fungus penicillium inhibits the growth of bacteria decades earlier. It just wasn't widespread.
She isn't really making an argument for capitalism, so I mean, we're 6 minutes into a 16-minute video. Maybe that's coming. But so far, she just kind of waves her hands and says, efficient allocation of resources, and never attempts to make the argument.
Known. The British psychologist Burton Sanderson, for example, observed this in 1870 and wrote a book about it. There are also several other written documentations from other people around that time who had studied the effects of fungi on bacteria. Fleming's contribution was that he realized the fungus was shedding a particular substance which he called penicillin, but he pretty much left it at naming the stuff. It wasn't until 10 years later that a group at the University of Oxford set out to find a way to grow the fungus and extract penicillin in large quantities. They then conducted medical trials, and once they were sure penicillin was both safe and effective, their method was scaled up by the pharmaceutical industry.
And the pharmaceutical industry, of course, made it available to anyone who could afford it, which isn't exactly what you call an efficient way of distributing. And I mean, it's an efficient way of making money off of distributing penicillin, but if the idea is to, like, cure diseases, which is the only legitimate purpose of this stuff, then it's not a very good example.
Two members of the Oxford group later shared the Nobel Prize with Fleming. So what saved all those many lives wasn't just Fleming's observation in a petri dish. The game changer was producing the stuff in large quantities and bringing it where it was needed.
But, I mean, she's going to try to say that that's capitalism, but capitalism wasn't bringing it where it was needed. Capitalism was bringing it where it was profitable, which is why huge parts of the world went completely without this stuff for a very long time, and still have to, like, I mean, it's amazing to hear somebody talk about the pharmaceutical industry as it exists in capitalism as an efficient way of allocating medicines when we are living in the period that saw the term vaccine apartheid coined to refer to how basically the countries in the imperial periphery are having the hell of a time even getting access to vaccines.
Innovation and industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism. That's what saved all those people.
Yeah, well, she hasn't defined capitalism yet. She's just saying good, she's saying things, she's attributing good things to it so far. She hasn't actually attempted to make the argument that the reason that all those lives were saved was that there was somebody profiting off of the pharmaceuticals industry. And if she did, she would also have to take into account the huge number of lives that have been lost because they could not afford this shit.
Capitalism got a pretty bad rep when Marx claimed that it's just about grabbing hold of the means of production and exploiting the working class.
Well, I mean, you haven't actually argued that it isn't.
Of course, there was an element of truth to his fears.
They're not fears. He actually did fucking math to point it out.
Some things went badly wrong during the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, that's
another story.
Oh, okay, so all the bad things about capitalism are another story. I can't wait to see that video. You're going to be doing another video where you talk about his fears. I mean, he didn't need fears. He was actually watching capitalism operate and seeing what it was doing to people. And it's worth noting Adam Smith, who she mentioned earlier, also was seeing capitalism form around him, and he didn't like it either. He called it the vile maxim of the masters of mankind, all for us, nothing for anyone else.
For today, we just need to know that capitalism, like fiat money, requires a governing institution.
Okay, this is one more point for her. I mean, yes, capitalism requires the state. You can't have capitalism without the state.
That's because someone must be there to enforce contracts should the need arise.
I mean, it's actually interesting. You don't usually see these things. People who are making the pro-capitalist case, or trying to, or in this case just sort of hand-waving and saying capitalism is good, just trust me, usually don't acknowledge a few of these things, like that capitalism is a very recent thing, that most of human history, that it's a blip on the radar screen of human history, or saying that capitalism can't function without the state. A lot of the time you will actually not see those points conceded, although I bet she doesn't even understand that these are concessions.
That and a few other things, as we'll see in a moment. There are many different ways to govern a capitalist system, and they go by different names, like welfare capitalism, or laissez-faire capitalism, or state capitalism. Now, one can debate how well the actions of certain governments reflect the interests of their electorate, if they were elected in the first place, but that's another story.
Well, actually, I mean, you're making the argument that capitalism is good. So surely the question of whether it's good for the people who are being ruled by a capitalist system is not another story. She's just like, is this going to be her entire case? It's like every time she gets to something where it's like, where the very things that she needs to be arguing, she's going to be, yeah, that's another story.
Even so, capitalism has been enormously successful in unlocking societal progress, and the
What is societal progress, though? What does that mean?
nations who still don't use it, such as North Korea, Cuba, and Laos, are places you don't want to live.
Citation needed. First of all, let's just leave aside, she acknowledges that state capitalism exists, and then she's going to pretend that the DPRK, Cuba, and Laos aren't an example of it. That's already cute. But just sort of saying, first of all, like, the situation in the DPRK and the situation in Cuba, I can't talk about Laos. Although I would note that one of the reasons that you might be a little bit uneasy about living in Laos is because the place is full of fucking mines that the US dumped there and that they refused to help them remove. And so fucking farmers are getting their legs blown off decades later after the US destroyed their country. And that Cuba's economic problems pretty much all come down to the fact that the U.S. has been trying to strangle them economically for, since 1961, so, yeah, for over half a century now. And that nonetheless, they actually have one of the best healthcare systems on the planet. They have developed possibly the most effective currently available COVID vaccine, in addition to vaccines about all sorts of things. I mean, actually, so yeah, is she gonna just say this is another story?
We've seen that capitalism is a system that combines markets with governing rules to efficiently distribute resources.
No, we haven't seen it. We've seen you say that. You keep on just throwing the words efficient allocation or efficient distribution of resources over and over again. You haven't actually made that case, and every time you acknowledge that somebody is saying, that somebody might say, actually, it's not that great a way of distributing resources, or actually, it kind of sucks when you look at it, you go, well, that's another story. Like, I mean, what do you mean we have seen?
This distribution of resources works best if everyone can put forward their offers freely and customers can pick what they want. This is known as a free market. and it optimizes the distribution of resources by competition. Free markets are a beautiful example of decentralized self-organization.
Except there's nothing decentralized or self-organized about it. Because, okay, capitalists do a lot of self-organization, but the reality is the state is very much essential, even when you talk about like laissez-faire free market capitalism. The whole thing falls apart if there isn't a state, if there aren't cops and soldiers to enforce rich people's property rights. The whole thing falls apart immediately. Also, an invisible hand. I love. See, you can tell when somebody's actually read Smith and when they haven't, because Smith was being sarcastic about the invisible hand. He was pointing out that the free market, the free trade policies Britain was imposing on all their colonies that impoverished the shit out of them, somehow did not spared Britain from the worst, and it was done by an invisible hand. You know, isn't that weird? That somehow Britain didn't fare as badly as the places that Britain was imposing this economic policy on. Makes you think, huh?
An invisible hand, as Adam Smith put it. The way it works in a nutshell is that everyone can trade around until they've got what they think is the best combination of goods, services, and financial assets.
Or they can, that's if they actually have things to trade. But most people, of course, are just going to have to work themselves to death.
If someone doesn't use resources as efficiently as possible, some competitor can do it better.
Well, what does it, again, she keeps on using efficient. Define efficient. Efficient for what purpose? Did I just throw that word around? I mean, this is like, the thing about Sabine Hossenfelder is that she has decided for some reason to just do right-wing bullshit outside of her field. I've heard that she's not great in her field, which is, I believe, physics. But the thing about making the case for capitalism is there are a lot of things that you have to know about how to do it in order for the deception to work. But she doesn't know that. She's actually, like, acknowledging things she shouldn't and hand-waving away all sorts of things that anyone who is, like, skilled at arguing that capitalism is a good thing knows they have to spend their time arguing about it. At the very least, they have to deny it, or something like that. This is really interesting because this is very amateur hour.
And beat them off the market.
What's the point of... It's clearly not an invisible hand. I can see the fucking hand.
This idea also goes back to Adam Smith, but later blossomed into an entire discipline now known as microeconomics. Microeconomics is all about how agents...
She still has not actually explained why capitalism is good. Like, it's like she's doing a book report. She just found out about this stuff and she's just telling us what she read off of Wikipedia.
That could be people or corporations or institutions, trade, and how that trade distributes resources where they are most needed.
Well, I mean, surely the question is whether that does that, because for the most part that doesn't. Which is, again, why most of the world has been effectively shut out of vaccination.
To be fair, microeconomics has some shortcomings when it comes to explaining how we trade in reality.
You mean it has some shortcomings when it comes to doing the thing it says it's for?
But that's another story.
This is the Sabine Hossenfelder drinking game. Anytime she reaches something she doesn't want to touch because she has no way to find a way to make it look good, she'll just, when you just drink when she says that's another story.
By and large, microeconomics works fine and several Nobel Prizes have been awarded for it.
Yeah, except the thing is that doesn't mean anything. Nobel Prizes for economics, like Milton Friedman got one for coming up with an ideology that has been like fucking ruining everybody's lives since the 1970s.
One of the most important insights to come out of this research area is that free markets only work to everyone's benefit if they're set up properly. Keep in mind that capitalism isn't just a free market, it's a free market plus the governing framework to run it. Free markets do not, for example, work to everyone's favor if some people have insider information.
Which is literally how the entire thing works in the first place.
Which gives them a trading advantage. This is why we have laws against that.
Yeah, we have laws against that, and nonetheless, it's the only way any of this works, because everybody's got some kind of... Everybody who is actually in the position of being a capitalist who is trading in assets, as opposed to having to sell their labor, they have some kind of insider information.
Free markets also work badly if one single company dominates a market sector.
You mean sort of like what pretty much always happens in capitalism.
And can use their power to force customers to stick with them. This is why we have laws against that.
And those laws keep on getting loosened, because the thing is, when you have that kind of market power, when you have that kind of power over people's means of survival, you can kind of get whatever legislation you need.
And free markets also don't automatically account for externalities, such as environmental pollution.
Yeah, or like climate change, or the fact that most of the emissions that have brought the global temperature up to this extremely dangerous level it's at have been since neoliberalism, or as she would call it, free market capitalism, took center stage.
An externality is generally any consequence of trade that doesn't directly affect the trading parties.
Yeah, and the thing about capitalism is all of the incentives are in favor of externalizing risk, which is why you get things like the global financial crisis of 2008. But that's another story I think we're about to be told.
They can be both good and bad, but it's the bad ones that are the problem. Suppose there's a river going by your house that everyone is free to use.
Well, I mean, capitalism will sort that out pretty quickly.
One day a clothing company puts up a factory and dumps their toxic waste into the river. Or the fish die and no one dares swimming in the river anymore. This is clearly not an optimal use of resources.
Well, how are you defining optimal use of resources? And, I mean, why aren't we talking about why it is that the company decided to pollute this fucking river in the first place? What exactly, I mean, they didn't set up because they had the specific purpose of polluting the river. They were making clothes. But it's cheaper, and therefore more profitable, not to actually do anything to mitigate your environmental impact. So if they can get away with it, and in the free market system that she has been very specifically advocating here, although doing a very slapdash job of it, getting away with it is the norm.
You might say, why didn't Smith's invisible hand prevent it? The reason market forces didn't prevent it is that the water was free to use.
No, the reason market forces didn't prevent it is because the market actually strongly favors this. Because market forces are, I mean, it's just nonsense. I mean, again, this is just so fucking, this is so amateurish. But the point is, there's profit. So she's saying that there's no externality in making the water, in, like, privatizing the water. First of all, this is bullshit. If you want to know, I mean, like, Britain privatized the shit out of their water. Chile privatized the shit out of their water. Their water quality is terrible. Because nobody gives a shit about the water quality. When it comes to drinking water. When it comes to use for, small farmers and things like that. I mean, in Britain, where, again, the water quality, where the water is massively privatized, I mean, they're just literally dumping shit into it. Untreated, raw sewage, and just kind of calling it a day. Because that's most profitable, and the fucking water companies don't give a shit. They keep on just raising their rates because they've got a monopoly on something people will die if they don't get.
The market didn't know it had any value, so pollution...
Well, if the market didn't know it had any value, then that's not really a great argument for letting the market decide anything, is it? Because we're talking about literally a thing we need in order to live. a thing that we cannot go without for more than a couple of days if we don't want to die. If the market, this all-knowing, this thing that you're saying that the world should be organized around, doesn't understand that a thing that we need in order to survive has value, then maybe the market sucks.
Couldn't reduce its value. There are several ways to deal with problems like this.
Well, one of them is communism.
One is
the one that works.
to just pass laws that forbid certain actions and punish those who disobey. Or you can put a tax on the pollution so that at least the government has money to clear up the mess.
Yeah, assuming it can be cleaned up, which sometimes it can't. Sometimes the damage is just done, the water is unusable, and even if you clean it up, it's still going to be no good. And if you put a tax on it, if you put a fine on it, then all that happens is that these companies will then work that into their calculations and adjust their price structure and, their wage structure in order to account for the off chance that the state will actually pursue them for these things.
Or you can put a price on using the water. There are pros and cons to all of those.
That last one in particular, because you put a price on using the water, and then that means poor people can't get water, and then they die.
But that's a different story.
God, why doesn't she should just call this fucking video? I was going to explain why capitalism is actually good, but that's a different story.
Story for today is that we have known that externalities can lead to market failures since the middle of the last century.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting? So what you're saying is for most of the history of capitalism, it has been known that allowing capitalists to just structure transactions so that people who are uninvolved and have no say in what goes on in the transaction bear all the risk causes problems, and we're still dealing with those problems today. It sounds like capitalism didn't do a good job of solving that one.
Carbon dioxide emissions are such an externality. For the market to optimize the use of fossil fuel resources, we should have put a price on releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We did not.
Yeah, except that doesn't work, again, because you can account for these prices. This is why, you look at, for example, when companies are working out safety measures on, say, cars, they will actually do a cost-benefit assessment, and they will work out exactly how they need to structure everything so that the profit they make will not be substantially harmed by any fines or wrongful death settlements or personal injury settlements that they have to pay out if their defective product kills people or does people a serious injury. The thing is, when you're actually, all this stuff can be just planned into it. Making it cost something doesn't actually mitigate the damage.
And that's why we're now in deep shit.
Well, no, we're in deep shit because there's this massive overproduction going on that benefits nobody. We're talking about that is just a complete waste production. For example, if you watch Louis Rossman's channel, he had a great example of this. He wasn't using it as an example of overproduction in capitalism, but it's what it is. See, they decided over at Apple, the people who are just geniuses when it comes to finding environmentally destructive, consumer harmful ways of fucking up PC design. They decided they were going to solder the SSD onto their motherboards on their MacBooks. So now, if your drive fail, and also they have combined all the things you need in order to boot the computer are now within that SSD. So if that SSD fails, not only can you not just replace it easily because it's soldered right onto the board, you have to just go out and get a new board. But you can't just. But even if you did, it would be useless because you can't get the damn thing to boot because all of that stuff is on a proprietary hard drive format. So what that means is they produce, instead of producing replacement SSDs, or say replacement motherboards or things like that, which they are producing entire replacement computers, and they have designed their entire business model so that if one little component fails, all of the incentives are in favor of people buying this whole replacement computer. It is massive waste production. And you have this sort of thing going on all over the place. It's called planned obsolescence. So, I mean, it's not just, it isn't that somebody didn't think of putting some sort of a price tag on carbon emissions that did it. It's that capitalism has a certain imperative, and that imperative is constant growth and constant profit, and that profit has to keep on getting higher. And if you saturate a market by selling everybody who's in the market for something, that thing, so nobody needs to buy it, then you're in the shit. So if you make the things too good, so they last too long, then that will actually harm your business. So you have to make them worse, and you have to make them harder to repair, easier to break, so that people have to keep on coming back and buying replacements for your shitty product. And that is a big part of why we're in deep shit. Like, there is so much production that we could just stop doing, and it would actually not really adversely affect anybody's life inherently. Because nobody would actually be going without something that they need, because so much of this production is just pure waste.
So yes, our current capitalist systems do have a problem with environmental protection.
But that's a different story?
But the reason isn't that there's something wrong with capitalism per se. It's that we didn't set it up correctly in the first place.
Wait, okay, but you've been making the argument that we should be leaving everything up to market forces. But then you're saying actually leaving it up to market forces, i.e. neoliberalism, is what has caused this fucking problem, and that therefore we shouldn't do that. This is so fucking confused.
Basically, the origin of the problem is that no one paid attention to economists.
Literally no problem has been caused by people failing to pay attention to economists. In fact, if you look at economists, those motherfuckers have been cheering this bullshit along all along. In fact, the way that this system is set up came because people were paying attention to fucking economists. Economists, you could, snap your fingers, and if most economists on this planet disappeared, we would know no less than we do now about the economy. Because the vast majority of economists don't know shit about economics. They just exist to justify the system.
And unfortunately,
it's economists we should have paid attention to, not climate scientists, say.
We still don't pay enough attention to economists. The current situation...
Maybe they should say something useful then. Maybe people would listen to them then.
Is that companies who voluntarily produce environmentally friendly goods put themselves at a competitive disadvantage because other companies exploit the environment at zero cost.
Yeah, exactly. It costs actually more to do things, and it is less profitable to do things in anything that remotely approaches an environmentally responsible manner. And that's before we get into the fact that capitalism massively incentivizes just irresponsible production in the first place.
This moves the burden onto the consumer. If you want to buy a climate-friendly product today,
this is
you
just
face
such a hot
extra
mess.
Costs because fossil fuels are cheap and getting to net.
Yeah, and why are fossil fuels cheap, by the way? It couldn't be anything to do with the fact that the state that loves to talk about market forces when the question is what most people are going to do to make sure that they have something to eat tomorrow. The state massively subsidizes fossil fuels. In fact, I mean, the U.S. has an entire branch of foreign policy that is nothing but a big subsidy for fossil fuels. On a certain level, the Pentagon budget is a fossil fuel subsidy.
Zero is not. This makes no economic sense, and it'll ultimately not work. It's completely upside down. Products whose production causes damage to the environment, which then requires adaptation and mitigation, should be more expensive, not less expensive.
Like, okay, but you're not making an argument for capitalism right now. You're pointing out why capitalism got us into this problem in the first place. Are you about to say this is another story? Is that what we're going to get? It's going to be another story again?
This is why economists have argued for decades that we need to put a price on carbon, and it's why several countries have now introduced carbon taxes or use a cap and trade system.
Yeah, both of which are useless. Both of which are completely worthless.
To calculate
Particularly cap and trade. Cap and trade is worse than nothing.
the cost of carbon emissions, one basically needs to evaluate the damage the emissions would cause in the future and then put a price on them. It's called the social cost of carbon. There's a long debate about just exactly how to calculate this, but that's another story.
But what if there were another approach to this, that another system other than the one you're sitting here defending that doesn't have this problem because it has a concept of enough?
At the moment, carbon taxes and trading schemes only apply to about a quarter of all emissions, and the price of carbon is almost certainly still too low.
Yeah, and that trading system is completely useless. Oh yeah, and covered by an emissions trading system. Yeah, emissions trading systems, not surprisingly, are the most common because they're the ones that basically allow you to just continue business as usual. It's a completely nonsense thing.
But it's a step in the right direction.
No, it isn't.
In summary, capitalism has been incredibly successful in advancing society. To the extent that it has caused us problems, it's because we haven't properly used it.
God, I mean, this is like the Scientology case for capitalism.
The solution is not to abandon it, but to make sure it works to our
Well, no, why don't we talk about abandoning it? Why don't we talk about alternatives? You haven't talked about alternatives.
advantage. There's no simple way to do that.
Because it's actually by design not going to work to most of our advantage. Because it's not for most of us.
And everyone who claims that the solution is to either discard capitalism or blindly trust it didn't understand the problem in the first place.
Well, see, that's an argument. See, if I were making this video, that is what I would spend the 16 minutes explaining, why that's the case. Rather than just sort of throwing that in there after spending 16 minutes saying, capitalism efficient, capitalism efficient. Oh, there are also bad things, but that's another story. I'm not going to talk about it. I mean...
Microeconomics and financial modeling is completely fascinating.
Yeah, until you realize it's people's lives that are being fucked around with.
It's basically the mathematics that rules the world.
Yeah, and that is scary. That's not fascinating.
If you want to learn more about how it works, our sponsor Brilliant can help you with this. Brilliant is...
Okay. Oof. Yeah, that was fun. 1 million subscribers, and she doesn't even need to make she doesn't even know how to do, like, she's making a PragerU video, but she doesn't know how to make a PragerU video. And PragerU videos are some of the easiest shit in the world to make. These all, God. Let's see. But it's, we've got a half an hour left. Why don't we see what's going on? How's everybody doing, chat? Anyone have any preferences for our next video? That was actually, I have to say, that was kind of fucking boring. And I would certainly be updating. You see, responding to Caleb Maupin's response to my react to Caleb Maupin's video. That's Keffels. That should be painful. Right-wingers should agree with me on this one thing. Okay. I think we have to look at this.
I am putting out an...
I wasn't asking.
open bulletin to everyone on the right who watches my videos. Maybe
That's like probably most of the people who watch this videos at this
not that
point.
many of them, but if you know a person who could use this video and you want to show it to them, I am inviting you to do so, okay? Because I genuinely and desperately want to know an answer to this question. And please, if I could just get some kind of answer, okay? The right wing, and I'm not going to argue why it's right wing, okay? It's constantly doing the, Western civilization, we must defend tradition posting.
Yes, because they're Nazis, and what they mean by Western civilization is white supremacism and misogyny and homophobia. I mean, it's not actually all that hard to know why they're doing it. They kind of come right out and tell you. Their idea of tradition is basically no gays, no trans people, no Jews, women as domestic slaves.
Twitter account Culture Critic posted this: "The American mind cannot comprehend this." This is, by all accounts, an absolutely gorgeous neighborhood. It is unbelievably pleasant to look at. I am delighted just taking in the pixels. I love it. So my question to you guys is, do you or do you not like 15-minute cities?
Oh, that's what we're talking about? Also, I mean, the, U.S. urban planners certainly can't comprehend this. Because, where's the fucking 50 different McDonald's and 3 Walgreens within 100 yards of each other?
Because whenever you circle jerk about traditionalism, or about escaping modernity, or talk about, how much you love these ancient German villages...
Yeah, because... God, does this motherfucker not know what dog whistles are? They like it. They like those ancient German videos because they could just get murder Jews and get away with it. Like in the old days. That's what they mean. That's the tradition they like. They show you this shit, but...
or beautiful villas like this. Whenever you talk about that,
that's not what a villa is.
You are describing towns, neighborhoods, and cities which meet the guidelines of a 15-minute city. The whole point of a 15-minute city,
well, probably
the only thing that it means is that everyone who lives in the city is a 15-minute walk away from the basic things that you need. That's it. And that describes this. I guarantee you that this block of buildings right here contains a cafe, a grocery store, a blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, what is... let me see. Okay, that looks like something in the south of France. It looks like something in the Med. Now, it looks like some sort of a resort community, just looking at all the yachts parked out of it. Outside
I guarantee you. This is very clearly, this absolutely meets that criteria. This doesn't even look like a 15-minute city. This looks like a 5-minute city. This is not large. Look at how large the people are down here. We're not looking at this from space or whatever. I'm pretty sure that if you lived right here in the center of town, you're a 5-minute walk from the water or less. If you're right here, you pass by what? 1, 2, 3, maybe at most a dozen buildings.
God, Jesus, Ian. You spend all this time telling us that you can explain what the right wing wants and everything, and you haven't worked out that actually the right wing doesn't give a shit about any of the stuff you're talking about. When they're talking about tradition, they're talking about fucking bigotry.
On one side, it's kind of claustrophobic. Yeah, it's densely built, sure, but look, it's gorgeous, and people clearly want to be there,
People are there. It looks pretty from here. I would imagine that it's probably a resort destination, would be my guess. Is this Malta, maybe? Is this an island off of Malta? That would be a possibility. But...
cities all used to be built like this, even if I look up... Hold on, look, okay? Old London drawing. Now, this is what London looked like, or at least a drawing of what London looked like, before modern construction techniques even existed. Okay, this is before we had the ability to do a lot of the stuff that we can do now. And yet, if you look at old drawings of London, what do you see? Whoa! You see dense, tightly packed.
You don't need old drawings of London to get that. That's like if you go to London now, that's what you see. This isn't that old. This is terraced houses. Pretty much all of the housing in Britain is a terraced house. I mean, that's what you find everywhere. That's kind of how you know you're in Britain, is that it's terraced houses. A lot of them are Edwardian, and they got these big bay windows in front, and they were really badly converted by property developers who wanted to just turn them into flats and charge like 300 quid for an application fee. This isn't that long ago. This is actually, I mean, if you went to a lot of London, it still looks a lot like this.
Mixed use residential neighborhoods where people would live up here and then walk down here. And don't get me wrong, I'm not idealizing the socioeconomic state of affairs at the time, okay? The people who lived in these areas.
Yeah, but the thing is, the people you're talking about, they are. Like, literally all the things that you're distancing yourself from right now, Ian, that's the stuff they like. That's what they mean when they say embrace tradition. All the shit that, you know, any halfway decent person is glad no longer exists to that extent, or is no longer as dominant.
Desperately poor. But if you take a look at old drawings, like, about the place, it's very clear. This is one of the reasons...
This isn't even an old drawing. It's dated 2008. Look, the date's on the bottom left corner. This is 15... I can't quite make out. Let me put my glasses on. Is that March, maybe? Yeah, 15 March 2008. It's not an old drawing.
That's why people really like Paris, you know? If you look up old Paris...
it looks a lot like current Paris, actually. I mean, that's the thing. The face... there aren't a lot of cities in Europe. They basically are just what they were, except they've sort of updated the interiors of some places, and they've done, like, slum clearance and shit.
Oh, you get photos of old Paris, but, you know, look at this. Many people consider Paris to be one of the most pleasant cities in the world to visit, and it gets a lot of tourism, and people speak highly of its cafe culture. Here.
Well, I mean, that's clearly all you need for a fucking city. And yeah, I mean, this is just another example. You don't need old pictures. You would probably, almost certainly, find that this block, what is this? I didn't see the street name. You would almost certainly find that this block is it looks basically, the shop fronts would be different, but other than that, the block would be exactly the same. Because most of Paris is actually pretty old.
Here.
I mean, Paris was lucky to have been spared from massive aerial bombardment during the Second World War. And so a lot of its old architecture is actually intact.
More cars, you know, they're sweeping up Porsche, which is 90% of what the economy was 150 years ago. It was sweeping up Porsche on cobblestone roads, okay? It was a different time. But, like, this was a 15-minute city. Do you know why?
See, I don't know about that.
Because people didn't have cars. If you want, like, because people knew.
Hang on. When was the Paris metro set up? Métro de Paris. Okay, began operation July 19th, 1900. So, this photo could easily have coexisted with the métro.
That everyone was walking to get their groceries or their needs met or go to the dentist. So
I mean, actually, I recently saw a statistic. Apparently, in France, nobody is on average anyway more than like 15 minutes away from the nearest baker.
That they could knock holes in your teeth to excise the ghosts that were making your teeth hurt. You know, people would build their markets in the city. People would walk to things.
Motherfucker, he's talking like this is the past. That's kind of how it currently works. I mean, I've lived in European cities. The market is in the middle of the city. You can, and that's true of Paris. I mean, you have like You just sort of walk down, like, otherwise, you know, you have mixed-use residential blocks, and you have all these little bakeries and shops, you know, he's talking about this like this is old-timey shit, because it is literally impossible to imagine it in the U.S., because the urban planning here has been just so obsessively based on cars that the idea of having things conveniently located so you can walk is just beyond people's belief. Like, I mean, I used to, when I lived in town in Cincinnati, I was like about, I don't know, mile and a half away from my favorite cafe. And so on days when it wasn't too nasty out or something like that, I would normally just walk there. I would just take it was a nice long walk, got my day started, and when I would tell people that I was walking there, they would look at me like I was out of my mind. These same people who will put on outlandish lycra costumes and run around in circles and call it exercise would look at me strangely because I was taking a nice long walk from A to B.
In the city, and it would be, I don't know exactly.
This, well, it's basically Ian is misunderstanding or pretending to misunderstand what Nazis mean when they talk about, you know, cancel modernity, embrace tradition, or reject modernity, embrace tradition. And he's saying that if they mean that, and he's pretending that, he has to know that when they're talking about tradition, they're specifically talking about the aspects of tradition most people are glad to have seen the back of. But he's acting as if they just mean, like, nice architecture. And he's also demonstrating that he, I guess, has never been outside of the U.S., because he's talking about, like, the way European cities are set up right now, as if that's some sort of old-timey shit, as opposed to just how cities are set up there.
15 minutes. The basic principle was that you could walk to get the things that you needed, you know? This was one of the things that made cities distinct. If you lived in villages back in the 1800s, and you needed something other than, like, food, or maybe a cobbler, or a Fletcher, or, you know, like a village kind of store.
Yeah, Julius Evola, is a good example. Hello, Raven G. But fundamentally, when they're talking about this, the tradition they want, the reason that they're like they want to live in old German villages or something, they don't want the village. They want to be able to, like, set Jews on fire. That's what they want. You know, they don't really give a shit about any of this stuff.
You would have to travel to the city. You've probably seen media, read books, watched movies, whatever, where somebody who lives in a village is like, oh, we have to go to the doctors, you know, we have to go to the town, and it's a 2 days trip.
Like, the English countryside is like this now, motherfucker. I mean, like, I sometimes visit a friend of mine in Devon, in this beautiful area just off of Dartmoor National Park. Gorgeous part of Devon. And if you want a taxi to get to the railway station, there isn't a railway station in town. You have to get a taxi to the railway station. And you have to book the taxi 2 days in advance, because there's just the taxi. You know, and the bus comes maybe twice a day, and it's all, basically rural transport is terrible. And if you need anything, you have to go in, apart from a few basics, you have to go into town. And it's an all-day thing, especially if you don't own a car. Like, I mean, he has not lived outside of the U.S.
Most of human history, for most people.
The fucked up thing is that hardcore anti-Semitism is really getting extremely mainstreamed at the moment.
Until we built...
But it's cool because it's pro-Israel anti-Semitism, and that's the only thing any of, like, the official anti-Semitism sniffer dogs give a shit about. They don't care if it's, like, targeting the shit out of Jews, as long as it's coming from people who also think that Palestinians should be persecuted.
The city. And the cool thing about the city was that unlike the village, it was dense enough that you could meet all human needs within a pretty tight 15 around where you lived.
Well, I mean, apart from actually the growing of the stuff, although urban agriculture has actually made some strides.
And then we've lost that, you know? And now every city in the West.
Yeah, every city in the West. Motherfucker, you're talking about the U.S. You're talking about the U.S. and Canada. This is not, like, I mean, it's not even just Western Europe. Like, in Santiago, for example, like, let me say, everything, it's like a zombie apocalypse on the weekend. Like, everything's shut, so even the fucking supermarket's shut. But from living in the center of Santiago in Chile, you can just walk to the fucking market. Like, literally, there are two markets. There's La Vega, that's where you get all the fruit and veg, and then there's the somewhat more, like, posh and very fish-orientated Mercado Central, which is directly opposite La Vega. And, I mean, if you don't mind a little bit of a walk, you know, it's about, say, half an hour walk, it's right there. It's right there, or it's 2 metro stations away at Puente Calicanto. Or, I mean, you know, if you need the pharmacy, if you need the supermarket, there are a bunch of supermarkets, right? Walking distance and stuff like that. I mean, but the position of, like, a fruit and veg market sort of thing, right in the middle of a city, that is only a weird thing for, like, post-World War II U.S. cities. In Western Europe, that's pretty normal. In, like, Latin America, in my experience, that's kind of how things work. Pretty much everywhere I've been outside of North America, this is just the normal way of doing it. So when he talks about is like the entire West, it's just bullshit.
And this is like the obsession with 15-minute cities being some kind of World Economic Forum plan to destroy American values or whatever.
I didn't even realize that it had actually been imported to the U.S. So the only fash I've heard freaking out over 15-minute cities are British fash. I hadn't even heard 15-minute cities being proposed here. Because the thing is, 15-minute cities in Europe, in most of Western Europe, would be relatively easy to achieve already because a lot of the basics are already there. Like, the public transport is more functional than here. Like, and it also, you know, exists, unlike a lot of places here. But, I mean, here, the entire way cities are organized, and especially fucking suburbs, which is now where people who are getting priced out of the city end up, in the, like, the most decrepit suburbs. It would take a fundamental reorganization of city planning, really.
This is like purely an American, or at least Western fixation, because people who live in Europe, you know, this is every...
Motherfucker, God, like, did you do any research for this? Because, like, the first people to do, like, British fash invented freaking out over 15-minute cities. And Britain is way closer to 15-minute cities than the U.S., even in the, like, even at the U.S.'s closest.
Free American city now, okay? This is what we live in. And we think that, like, any attempt at, like, maybe having a market right here in this corner gets interpreted by a bunch of right-wingers as, like, the World Economic Forum Jews trying to destroy America.
Yeah, except there's no attempt that's the problem. There's no attempt at having a market right there. In fact, I mean, these days you do actually, thinking about it, in some places I've been in North America, like, markets have sort of popped up, and it's become sort of a gentrification thing. In fact, they're trying to gentrify the shit out of Cardiff Central Market in Wales now as well. Unfortunately, I love that market. But that's, you know, they're hearing it, they're not talking about a specific proposal, but a specific market. The whole thing hinges on it being in the abstract. And they have latched onto this the way they latched onto fucking critical race theory, the way they latched onto, like, fucking trans people's existence, and all the other bullshit that they latch onto, the Barbie movie, a purple M&M, all this other shit, because they can just sort of, all they're doing is, like, doing outrage bait. It is nothing more than that. So, you know, the memo comes down, this is what you're gonna pretend to be pissed off over this week. And if it's something sufficiently abstract that it's pretty easy to sort of paint any kind of bullshit onto it, that's just all that much the better from their perspective.
American values or whatever. Seriously, they talk about 15-minute cities like it's some kind of City 17 dystopia project, and then Culture Critic will go on Twitter and that's the wrong photo. That's also the wrong photo. I found the right photo. And then they'll show this and they'll be like, "Oh man, Americans can't even fathom how dope and based and trad pilled and western pilled it is to live here."
Now, okay, I'm very curious where that island is. Chat, could somebody try to see if they can find that? I feel like that could be Malta. I feel like it could be a few like South French Mediterranean islands, just judging from the buildings on it. It feels vaguely familiar, and the hills make me also think sort of maybe Malta.
It's like, dog, you want what we want.
No, they don't! They really don't! Like, I mean, and that's where, this is what drives me out of my mind sometimes with fucking Ian. Does he not realize that they're dog whistling? Or does he realize that they're dog whistling? Is he, like, giving them an assumption of good faith that they don't deserve? Or does he know perfectly well they're full of shit, and he's just kind of allowing it to be taken as read because they know they don't want it. This is a whole big fucking dog whistle to them. This means a very specific set of things to them, and it has very little to do with the nice warm light and the fucking pretty red roofs and the hill and all the sea around it and shit. It's nothing to do with any of that.
No side of the aisle is genuinely committed to defending urban highway planning, okay? Basically,
well, no, they're fine with urban planning as long as it is simply in the interest of the fire industry. If it is about actually making the cities livable for the people living in them, as opposed to kicking them out in order to supplant them with people who can pay twice the rent, they don't give a shit. But as long as it's just about making little theme park cities for rich motherfuckers, they're cool with that. I mean, that's why there's so many fucking cops as well.
Everyone hates it, especially populists. The difference is that...
I hate the term populist. It is a meaningless fucking term. I mean, it's used for two purposes. One is to trivialize fascism, and the other is to lump any kind of, like, social democracy, any kind of sort of mild leftism, or anything, or even any, like, legit leftism, in with fascism.
That left-wing populists will look at the interurban highway, think, wow, that's terrible, and design solutions, whereas the right-wing populist will look at the interurban highway, think, wow, that's terrible, we must return to tradition, and then...
Yes, by which they mean, like, slavery and pogroms, and, like, legalizing marital sexual assault.
Screech online about 15-minute cities while posting photos like this.
Yeah, wow, you just discovered that they're full of shit. And that's, wow, I mean, this fucking guy will lecture people about, like, the right all day long, and he's acting surprised that they're ideologically inconsistent on the surface level.
So please, I genuinely need it. If you know anyone, if you want to show it around, I genuinely want to know. What are you doing? Do you want all of America to look like this? This is Houston downtown in the 1970s, by the way. It's better than it. It's better now. It's better now. They fixed a lot of this, but it's still pretty bad. It's not great.
Jesus, look at all the fucking car parks.
Thing. It's not good, but it's better than this. They fixed a lot of this. So do you want this? Which, by the way, I have to say, just to play into the conspiratorial mindset, just a little bit, okay? If I were to think of what model of city planning would be not locally determined, but rather determined by a bunch of shady economic elites who want to promote their own agendas at the expense of the average American, I would think this, and it would be car companies.
Yeah, and actually, car companies played a major role in this. In fact, there was a literal conspiracy case against the big auto manufacturers a few decades ago in the U.S. because they had literally colluded to bribe cities across the country to scrap their rail-based local transport systems and replace them with buses. But I mean, the thing is, you look that island. You think that isn't also determined in large part by a bunch of rich motherfuckers who are deciding what they fancy? It's just that the rich motherfuckers, they want to be able to spend time on that island, and yeah, in fact, the way when he talks about improving the city, a lot of that improvement will have been in the direction of making it more of an exclusive place for rich motherfuckers because nobody else can live there.
Like, if you actually want a kind of civic planning that genuinely is the product of a bunch of economic elites tearing our country apart, we have an example of that. And it's not subtle either.
Yeah, except the thing is they don't give a shit about economic elites. They're taking money from economic elites, a lot of them. They're taking literal fucking money from rich people. They're fine with rich people. When they talk about fucking economic elites, they mean Jews. Like, I mean, is he being deliberately obtuse here? Yeah, he must know this. Oh, that is a weird freeze frame I got him. He looks like Trotsky somehow. Seriously, look at this freeze frame. He looks like Trotsky, like merges with John Goodman. Something about the hair.
Know how the American car companies shaped local policy when it comes to parking minimums or intra-urban highways or whatever. We have this. This is not the kind of thing that a shadowy cabal of distant elites would want to force on you.
Yeah, well, except Jesus. See, this is just so fucking silly. Because, yeah, actually, this is where that, where, like, the ruling class, almost certainly this is, like, a resort town. I mean, just looking at, there are definitely some yachts in there, I mean, and almost certainly this is the sort of place where rich people like to spend time. Like, it's probably quite expensive to live there. Like, he is very much taking, because the thing is, when they try to say, when they talk about economic elites and say they had less influence in the past, they're talking about Jews again. But the thing is, the reality is, yes, there were actually, like, economic elites before capitalism, mercantile elites and feudal elites, and they said this is a handy way to have things organized. I mean, there wasn't as much explicit urban planning, but things were very much shaped according to their tastes and interests.
Because this is cool. This is good.
I mean, he's going off the string, but incidentally, I mean, I imagine it probably is nice, but it is a weird to be enthusing so much about this from an aerial photo. Like, what's it look like on the ground level? What like, let's walk into these densely arranged houses in these medieval streets and things, and see what's going on in the middle of the thing, because you really can't tell. I mean, maybe it's nice. I mean, it looks very pretty from this distance, but, like, if you're walking down the street in the middle of it, is it still nice?
Like, we're clearly gunning for the same target here.
No, we're not! We're not! I really I mean, I really don't like it when he tells Nazis that they're gunning for the same target. That does not feel good. That does not feel safe to me. Because they're gunning for that target very literally. And the thing is, he said some pretty hella anti-Semitic things of his own. So it's like, is he this ignorant, or is he just acting this ignorant? And that is like, but then that is what I always wonder when I watch him.
I genuinely think that if I could bring, like, most, like, alt-right types or whatever, like, a lot of conservative populists, if I could have them on and I could point at this and be like, hey, this is pretty cool, right? I think they would agree.
Jesus! Yeah, and they would mean something very different. And, like, what would you have achieved, Ian? What would you have fucking achieved? They say, ooh, that's very pretty. What have you achieved there? Except that you found a bunch of some fucking white supremacists who like medieval European architecture. That isn't an unusual thing. There are lots of them. I mean, like, what why? Why do you give a fuck? You might share architectural tastes with some of them. I don't give a shit.
I think humans just naturally want this, you know? The only people who want this are the car company executives, and they sell everyone else on it, you know? Anyway, just please, I just get the word out. I need to know.
Oh, God, that... I mean, first we have Sabine Holstenfeld. I don't know if you were there for the video that she did, which was marketed as a defense of capitalism, except she never really got around to defending capitalism. In fact, every time she ran into something that capitalism would need to be defended from, she goes, but that's another story. And the thing is, the rest of it was just like her doing a book report on the Wikipedia pages she read about economics last week or something. And it was boring as fuck. But it was also just total amateur hour, because she didn't know that there are certain things that you don't want to concede when you're making the case for capitalism. So she's like, it was like PragerU intern quality. But it is now time to it's time to wrap it up for tonight. Thank you to everyone who joined. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I am continuing to work on the ridiculously long media literacy video. It is like 84... just the script, I've been typing it up so that I can look at it on the screen of my tablet while I shoot it. And what I've typed, which is like half as much as I've written, is 8,400 words. This is some feature-length shit. But I'm going to be breaking it up nicely into chapters and stuff so people can come back to it and stuff. And I think it's going to be good. It's just going to be long. So that's a thing to look forward to. And I will be back tomorrow at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And on the other channel, Hyperpolyglotting, my language stream, I will be there from 4:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time tomorrow. I hope to see you all there. Have a good night, have a good weekend, and I look forward to seeing you.